When it comes to the long history of America's wars, most people know about the Civil War, Vietnam, the Second World War, and Iraq and Afghanistan. But few probably remember one of the country's more obscure yet significant conflicts, the War of 1812. Today marks the 200th anniversary of the beginning of the war that pitted the United States against Great Britain for a second time. A new book is shedding light on the conflict. It's called 1812, War and the Passions of Patriotism. Joining us this morning is the author and Associate Professor of History at NYU, Nicole Eustace. Nicole, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's good to have you here this morning. You know, it's one of those conflicts that you learn about in school, and then as soon as you take the test, you forget about it. So if you were to give someone a brush up of the War of 1812, what would you tell them?
Well, I'd say that one of the reasons it's so interesting is it's the first time that war is formally declared through a constitutional process ever in the history of the United States. Unlike the Revolution, which is just kind of, it grows out of a patriot movement, this is something that goes through a formal legal process. In a democracy, people are answerable to the voting public and to the greater public at large in terms of public opinion, and that makes it interesting. During
this war, Washington, D.C. burned to the ground. Our national anthem was inspired. Why is this conflict? Why are these battles so forgotten?
Well, the war didn't accomplish a lot of its goals. It tried to invade Canada, and that was a big failure. It tried to end British impressment on the seas. That was not addressed by the final treaty. It tripled the national debt from about 45 million before the war to about 127 million after the war. And as you've just said, it burnt the Capitol to the ground. So there were a lot of reasons to kind of try to forget about it. But actually, what makes it really interesting to study is that in its own day, it was very popular. It gave way to something called the era of good feelings. That's a little moniker made up by the Boston newspaper, the Columbian Sentinel, in 1817, and everyone kind of felt really great about the direction of the country after the war, and that's a mystery.
And speaking of popularity, that would be Andrew Jackson. He became a very popular general during the War of 1812. Would he have become the 7th President of the United States if it weren't for the War of 1812?
Well, probably not, and that's for a few reasons. His major victory at the Battle of New Orleans proved truly inspiring to the country because it was a battle that went right in just about every respect. But just as significant as the Battle of New Orleans is a part of the war that people don't always think about because we think it was between Britain and the United States. But before New Orleans, before he fought the British, Jackson got 22 million acres of Native American land in Alabama and Georgia. And that opened the way to a lot of U.S. land settlement. And when we think about what the war really accomplished, not too much with Britain, but a lot vis-a-vis Indian nations.
Decisive winners, if we're thinking about maybe the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, you have them. When you think about this war, not so much. What happened?
Well, in fact, it's basically a stalemate as far as the British and the Americans are concerned. It's a victory for the Canadians. We launched many invasion attempts on Canada. They all failed. So Canada remained independent. So it was a big success for them. And as I've just said, it was a big loss for Indians. Not only the large cessions to Andrew Jackson, but really the shattering of the Shawnee Confederacy in the Great Lakes region and the end of any effective cooperation between the British and the Indians. Because after the War of 1812, the British stopped being effective allies of Native Americans, and that really opened the West to effective U.S. settlement.
So taking it back from today, if we're going to look back in hindsight, the one big takeaway from the War of 1812 would be what?
Well, my work is on culture. The culture of patriotism in the war. And I think the biggest takeaway from the war is that in a democracy, public opinion matters and popular culture matters. And freedom of the press matters. This was a war that was very controversial in its day, but that ultimately, after a big public debate and a big public conversation, brought people together in new ways.
Appreciate you coming by this morning.
Thanks
Nicole Eustace, Associate Professor of History at NYU. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the new book, of course, called 1812, War and the Passions of Patriotism.